On November the 7th, 2028, the United States of America will choose its next president. For the nation's Republican Party, the stakes could not be higher. The Republicans will be riding high after 4 years under the nation's current president, Donald Trump. But after nearly half a decade in which the party has been dominated by Trump's political movement, the party's future is available for the taking. By the time that the first vote is cast in November of that year, the eventual Republican nominee will have already emerged victorious from what will almost certainly be one of the fiercest political contests in the last half-century of American politics. In 2028, the soul of the Republican Party will be redefined, no matter what happens. But what the soul of the party becomes will be decided by the person who can rise to lead it. For the first time in the 2028 election cycle, but certainly not the last, let's take a close look at the race to the Republican nomination. The top contenders, the dark horse challengers, and the elephant among elephants who could end this contest before it ever truly begins. If one thing in American political life is certain, it's that every 4 years the Republican presidential primary will be a very crowded affair. Back in 2016, when Donald Trump surged to capture the nomination for the very first time, he contested the primary election within his own party against more than 15 high-profile rival candidates. In 2020, with the benefit of incumbency, Trump faced far less opposition, but then, in 2024, the intensity of internal Republican politics was placed on full display for the world to see. Despite Trump's status as the enduring leader of the Make America Great Again movement, he faced no fewer than a dozen challengers, including his own former vice president, several state governors, including the governor of Florida, Ron DeSantis, and high-profile names like Nikki Haley, Vivek Ramaswamy, and talk radio host Larry Elder. The 2024 campaign was a fascinating affair to witness, with several candidates trying to run to the right of Trumpism, or even on the platform of Trumpism itself, directly challenging the leader of that movement, while also performing some incredible rhetorical gymnastics to avoid insulting or alienating Trump directly. Perhaps, with that description, it should have been no surprise that every challenger failed miserably, and that Trump surged to win the primary in all except one state, in the District of Columbia. From that exercise, the world learned 2 lessons about the Republican Party of the 2020s. Lesson number 1, ambition is everywhere. Even when faced with the seemingly unbeatable leader of a movement that's transformed the Republican Party itself, several hungry and high-profile candidates took their shot anyway, with several among their number clearly angling to try again once Trump makes his eventual exit from US politics. But it's lesson number 2 that has the power to disrupt the Republican primary process in 2028. If Donald Trump is running, then there is no Republican alternative who even stands a chance. And that matters, of course, because there's a non-zero chance that Trump will attempt to run for a 3rd term in office. Never mind that he's constitutionally barred from doing so. Trump-loyal justices control America's Supreme Court, and at least for now, his party narrowly controls both houses of the legislature. Never mind that Trump has, at times, said that he won't run for a 3rd term, he's also floated the idea regularly despite those denials. He's written off his own statements about a 3rd term as a joke, but that's in the same way that he's done with a number of other controversial positions that have then become a matter of policy or personal conviction. His own Trump organization has been selling Trump 2028 caps for months now, and Republican legislatures have attempted to introduce bills that would clear the way for an attempt at a 3rd term, while potentially insulating him against a bid from potential Democratic rival and ex-president Barack Obama. As Trump told an NBC interviewer earlier this year about the prospect of a 3rd term, quoting him here, "There are methods in which you could do it. I'm not joking. A lot of people want me to do it." Whether Trump could actually pull this off, that's an open question. America's 22nd Amendment is very clear on the issue, and although his control of the courts would suggest he's got a path to gain some legal cover, there are no guarantees that such a process would resolve in his favor. Actually changing the Constitution would be practically impossible in today's environment, and the available legal loopholes are dubious if Trump does try to test them. And again, it's not clear that he'll actually make the attempt. As of the time of writing, Trump has most recently stated that he'll, quote, probably not run for a 3rd term. But for our purposes today, trying to identify top candidates in a 2028 Republican primary contest, we still have to at least account for the possibility. If Trump did attempt to run for a third term, he'd likely face some internal opposition from Republicans who've made a habit of opposing him. But those Republicans draw very little support within their own party and would not be a meaningful challenge to Trump in a direct primary. There's an outside possibility that a high-level Trump loyalist like Vice President JD Vance would choose to oppose him in a primary and justify his opposition on constitutional grounds. But in today's Republican Party, that's neither a likely outcome nor a winning strategy. If Trump runs to be the Republican nominee for president, Trump becomes the Republican nominee for president, even despite what could be an immensely chaotic election season against a rival Democrat. We emphasize the non-zero possibility of a Trump candidacy, partly to emphasize that if Trump does run, the race within the Republican Party is probably a foregone conclusion. We also emphasize the possibility because of what it implies for a race in which Trump doesn't run. From 2015, when he first swelled to capture the support of a plurality of Republican voters, all the way through to the end of his second term, Trump will have been the dominant force in Republican politics for over a decade. He's built the type of movement that effortlessly squishes the people who would dare become his internal rivals, with tens of millions of avid supporters who will, by Trump's own admission, support him no matter what he does. So, if that kind of political leader chooses to step aside, then make no mistake, the stakes in the next election will be the entire Republican Party. If a new leader can either capture Trump's appeal and command his legacy, or otherwise manage to redefine the Republican Party in their own image, then they, too, can become a remarkably powerful political force. And it's for that reason that the list of candidates we're about to introduce will get very long. With the soul of the Republican Party to play for, we here at Political Fronts don't expect anybody is going to remain on the sidelines. Okay, so in any pool of political candidates, some contenders will be stronger and more powerful than others, and today's Republican Party is no different. In a potential 2028 free-for-all, 3 potential candidates rise to the top: Donald Trump's successor, Donald Trump's statesman, and Donald Trump's son. First up, successor, incumbent Vice President JD Vance. 41 years old at the time of writing, born and raised in the state of Ohio, Vance surged to prominence after publishing his memoir in 2016, Hillbilly Elegy. It was a best-selling book at the time, not least because it was hailed as a way to understand problems in the rural Appalachian region of America's East, and thus to understand a large part of Donald Trump's populist appeal. Although Vance has a history of comments opposing Trump and the MAGA movement, he's since become a darling of the political right and was elected as a senator in 2022. He was the preferred pick for vice president, lobbied to Trump by figures like the right-wing commentator Tucker Carlson and the conservative think tank, the Heritage Foundation, as well as multi-billionaires who've become Trump allies over the years, like Elon Musk, Peter Thiel, and Mark Andreessen. In terms of his political stances, JD Vance in 2025 is something of a bridge candidate, bringing together 2 sides of the Republican Party that aren't necessarily enemies but aren't always in alignment. On the one side is the populist movement, the Christian, conservative, nationalist movement that preaches protection from foreign trade and immigration, professes loyalty to the American worker and the American family, and counts on the strong support of figures like Steve Bannon and Tucker Carlson, among others. This is the wing of the party that typically shows out at Trump's iconic rallies, decked out head to toe in red, white, and blue. Vance is a particularly effective unifying force, bringing that populist faction into alignment with what we'll refer to as tech industry MAGA. The Silicon Valley, Bitcoin-ish types who care a lot less about the idea of protecting America through isolation and economic constraints, and a whole lot more about innovating and earning massive profits in the fast and loose corporate environment that Trump has created. Vance has been able to navigate the tensions between those 2 sides better than nearly anybody else on the right, and he's appealing for the supporters of both sides. And in terms of his political power, Vance has come closer than anybody else to being named the heir of the MAGA movement. In August of this year, as Trump himself seemed to grow more hesitant around the idea of pushing for a third term, he indicated that it was Vance who was most likely to inherit the mantle that he would be leaving behind, quoting Trump, "In all fairness, he's the vice president." While the next candidate we're going to consider has also been floated in these same conversations, it's Vance who's received the clearest nod from Trump thus far, and according to press conversations with MAGA World insiders, it's widely understood that Vance is 2028's leading man. He's also been able to serve a dual role as the finance chair for the Republican National Committee, meaning that he's able to coordinate directly and at scale with the Republican donor base. That doesn't mean that Vance will necessarily choose to run, or that every other candidate will get out of the way for him, or that Trump will even endorse him officially. Instead, Vance appears to have secured a right of refusal. If Trump is going to step aside, then Vance is assumed to be his successor until and unless Vance himself chooses to decline that opportunity. As of the time of writing, Vance clearly leads national polling on the Republican side, drawing nearly 48% support from the Republican base, over 4 times the support given to the next most popular candidate. But if it's JD Vance who appears to be Donald Trump's most obvious successor, then there's also an obvious runner-up, Donald Trump's statesman Marco Rubio. Currently serving in the dual roles of Secretary of State and National Security Advisor, Rubio is 54 years old at the time of writing, the son of Cuban immigrants who raised Rubio in Miami, Florida, and also in the state of Nevada. Rubio has served as senator representing Florida from 2011 through to 2025, and he launched a presidential bid in 2015 when he was hailed as a young, diverse candidate who could become a sort of right-wing Barack Obama. But that didn't play out as Rubio intended, and at that time he was on the receiving end of Donald Trump's particular brand of campaign trail ridicule. But since then, he's become a closer and closer ally of Trump's in Washington. An experienced politician with relationships across the US legislature, Rubio was one of a small handful of Trump nominees to be elevated to his current post without very much controversy. It's in Rubio's status as a well-respected and considerably less controversial Republican that he draws a large part of his political appeal. Unlike the often combustible leadership of Trump, Rubio has built a reputation as a figure with more of a steady hand, who can still operate inside MAGA world with a high degree of competency.
If he hadn't inherited $200 million, you know where Donald Trump would be right now? Selling watches in Manhattan.
He's the sort of figure who can still rub elbows with non-Trump-friendly Republicans and even with Democrats, even as he oversees controversial initiatives like dismantling US aid, mass deportation of migrants, and American support of Israel and distance from Ukraine. In an election cycle that's likely to see something of a crisis of faith within Trump's political movement, once its leader decides to bow out of politics, Rubio is a candidate who could be acceptable to everyone. The MAGA base understands his closeness to Trump, while Republican voters who are opposed to the MAGA movement may see him as a return to a more traditional approach to politics. Indeed, Rubio is the other name that Trump has recently floated around as a potential successor. Speaking this past May, Trump mentioned Rubio in the same breath as Vance when he was asked about a successor, in a remarkable change of Rubio's fortunes from his time as Trump's punching bag back in 2016. At present, Vance and Rubio appear to be quite close, according to both their public statements and the reports of Republican insiders, and it's entirely possible that come 2028, they'll join forces to form a Republican ticket for president and vice president. According to some sources, Rubio is also seen as a potential backup option. If Vance ends up mired in scandal or loses popularity or fails to catch on once he's actually campaigning, Rubio could very easily be slotted into his position. Or, as is always the case in intra-party politics in the United States, there's a non-zero chance that within 3 years' time, these two could be bitter political rivals turned against each other by any number of confounding forces. If that's the case, then public polling would suggest that Rubio will have an uphill battle. While it's far too early to come to any solid conclusions, Rubio currently polls at around 7% support in the national polling average, as opposed to that nearly 48% support that we mentioned for Vance. But considering that Donald Trump once polled in the single digits among voting Republicans, it is impossible to count Rubio out. As one insider told the outlet NBC in May of 2025, quote, "You would still have to give the advantage to Vance because he is the sitting vice president. But everyone in Rubio's orbit is feeling really good about how things are playing out. If for any reason Vance isn't the guy, or the electorate is seeking an alternative, there is no question that Rubio is in pole position for that." And finally, there's the wild card within our top-tier trifecta, Donald Trump Jr. Age 47 at the time of writing, Don Jr. has no real political experience outside his father's campaigns and administrations, but he's spent years at the head of the sprawling Trump organization alongside his younger brother Eric, and he's been a fixture in Trump's political orbit since day one. Born and raised in the opulence of wealthy Manhattan alongside his siblings, that hasn't stopped Don Jr. from becoming a firebrand within the MAGA movement. Politically, Don Jr. is one of our top 3 candidates who most effectively harnesses the populist faction among Trump's support base, immersing himself into the movement's many conspiracy theories and fighting harder than nearly anybody else within Trump's inner circle to overturn the results of the 2020 presidential election. He's a bona fide culture warrior in Trump Sr.'s style, and at times he's known to take positions that even steer rightward of his own father. As for his political power, Don Jr. hasn't actually captured his father's political endorsement in any meaningful way, and he hasn't been mentioned in the same conversations where Trump has discussed elevating Vance and Rubio. But he's admitted as recently as this year that he's contemplating a run for the presidency, and public statements aside, his father is known to be deeply concerned with securing the future of his own family dynasty. Don Jr. is also very popular with his father's voter base, harnessing an energy that neither Vance nor Rubio have been truly able to muster within the most passionate, hardline corners of the party. Not only that, but there's real value to keeping the Trump name on the presidential ticket, especially in the eyes of Trump voters who would go to hell and back for the current president, but may be skeptical of a smooth, savvy Washington operator trying to convince people that they're a rightful successor. Don Jr.'s political appeal could swell even further in the event that Republicans take a beating in the upcoming midterm elections of 2026, when the presidency won't be contested, but Democrats stand a chance at regaining control over both houses of the legislature. In that situation, especially, Don Jr. would have a very real chance at building a mandate as a true grassroots leader for his party, while framing Vance and Rubio as precisely the sort of establishment hacks that the MAGA movement was built to reject. Perhaps as a sign of his enduring appeal, it's Don Jr. who comes in second place in the national polling behind Vance, still only capturing about 11% support, but getting to double digits despite a near complete lack of real political experience and before receiving any direct endorsement from his father. Again, it's entirely possible that only one of these 3 could seek the Republican nomination in 2028 if, instead of engaging in a competitive process, they were to work together. But each one of them is a top contender over and above any other potential competitors because each of them can lay legitimate claim to the status of heir to the MAGA movement. If just one of them chooses to run, then by default, they'll be assumed to be harnessing the movement's support until somebody else takes it from them. If 2 of them, or all 3 of them, choose to run, then at least within the MAGA wing of Republican politics, they'll most likely be contesting a strange sort of primary within the primary to see who can win support from that dominant share of Republican voters. It'll be up to every other candidate in the race to either try and make themselves part of that conversation or siphon away enough support from elsewhere in the party that they could become a viable alternative. It's when we move outside of our pool of top contenders that the race for the Republican nomination becomes very crowded very fast. But when it comes to elite candidates who live outside Trump's immediate political orbit, the obvious first name to mention is Ron DeSantis. 47 years old at the time of writing, DeSantis has served as the governor of the state of Florida since 2019, and it wasn't all that long ago that he was hailed as the future of the Republican Party. During the lead-up to the 2024 campaign season, it was DeSantis who was widely regarded as the most likely candidate to unseat Donald Trump and quite possibly to capture the support of the MAGA movement outright. DeSantis will be term limited out of his post as governor in 2027, meaning that as far as anybody knows right now, he'll have plenty of time on his hands when the 2028 campaign begins. As of now, DeSantis isn't actively laying the groundwork for a presidential run in the same way as some of the other candidates on this list, but DeSantis' proven ability to capture the national spotlight, even in a losing bid against a generational political force in Donald Trump, suggests that he might have a good chance of success if that generational politician steps aside. Insiders close to DeSantis indicate that a 2028 run is part of his plan right now, and that he'll likely attempt to challenge JD Vance directly for the mantle of heir to MAGA. Adding to his potential appeal, DeSantis is, shall we say, MAGA in vibes but not in affiliations, making him a potential favorite for voters who enjoy the popular swell of the MAGA movement but may doubt the authenticity of a Rubio or a Vance. Right now, DeSantis polls in third place nationwide after Vance and Trump Jr. and ahead of Rubio, pulling in support from about 9% of the likely electorate. Rounding out the top 5 in the public polling is another potential candidate with experience from 2024, current Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. Age 71 at the time of writing, RFK Jr. is among the most controversial figures of all American politics right now, known for his divisive stance on vaccines and other elements of public health and his efforts to gut the pre-existing public health infrastructure of the United States. But he also proved to be a potent political force in 2024, drawing significant support via public polling before he dropped out and endorsed Trump. Now, Kennedy could run as a candidate with real political experience, and he still commands support from millions of loyal followers who'd rather see him in charge of the United States than either Donald Trump or his chosen successor. In late 2025, Kennedy denied any presidential ambition in 2028 after being accused by far-right figure and Trump whisperer Laura Loomer of having attempted to lay the groundwork for an eventual pivot back to candidacy. The public support, however, does still appear to be there. According to current public polling, he commands about 4.5% of all polled Republicans, placing him well ahead of several firmly established fixtures in Republican politics. And by the way, just a note on polling data as we move forward, after RFK Jr., any candidate we discuss in this episode is polling at or below 4% nationally, according to the data available at the time of writing. Also plotting a potential do-over after a failed 2024 bid is former governor of South Carolina and United Nations ambassador Nikki Haley. Age 53 and currently working outside the realm of national politics, Haley was the most successful of the explicitly anti-Trump candidates in 2024. Although she didn't partake in particularly bold criticisms of Trump during that cycle, Haley's stance was widely understood to represent a desire to move away from Trump in future Republican politics. Right now, she's arguably the best positioned out of any Republican candidate to harness any anti-Trump desires that may still exist. At the same time, she'd essentially be hoping that if Trump chooses not to run in 2028, then that would cause a break in Trump fever, so to speak, and grow the wing of the Republican Party that wants to chart a different course. Haley still warrants mention among the relatively elite contenders, specifically because she speaks for that wing of the party when nobody else does, but her path to the nomination would be an intense uphill battle. And then there's Texas Senator Ted Cruz, who came in second place to Trump back in 2016 and holds a unique position within Trump's Republican Party. 54 years old and a senator since 2013, Cruz is secure in his political position, regardless of the broader situation within the Republican Party. Like Rubio, Cruz is the son of a Cuban immigrant, and he's a border state senator with real political experience. And he's one of only a few Republican leaders, other than Trump, who advocates a clear political philosophy as a staunch anti-establishment, religious conservative with a distinct approach to fiscal and international issues. Cruz is something of a perennial political contender, never particularly close to the White House, but never particularly far away. And while his political vision ultimately wasn't able to compete with Trump's MAGA movement, he may decide to find out whether Trump's absence could provide more oxygen for his ideas. According to people close to Cruz, he intends to build a campaign in 2028 that'll center on the idea of traditional conservatism, changing the direction of the Republican Party towards something more familiar, but not advocating that it simply revert to what it was before Trump ever became a serious political contender back in 2016. Already, Cruz has been willing to push back against Trump on tariffs, and if that pushback continues, it should be an indicator that a Cruz candidacy may be a realistic possibility. Meanwhile, current Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem may be plotting a challenge from within Trump's own movement. Age 53 and formerly the governor of the state of South Dakota, Noem was widely regarded as a top candidate to serve as Trump's vice president in 2024 before the publication of an autobiography in which she proudly described having shot the family dog. Despite that controversy, Noem has been rehabilitated within the MAGA movement, and she's become one of the key architects of Trump's anti-immigration crackdowns.
You are considering entering America illegally. Don't even think about it.
During her tenure as Homeland Security Secretary, Noem has taken every opportunity to pose for pictures and give interviews from the center of Trump's immigration enforcement drive, and she's become a particularly combative member of the administration. Similar to Donald Trump Jr., Noem may be able to capture that firebrand populist side of the Republican Party in a way that Vance or Rubio couldn't, and that candidates like Haley or Cruz wouldn't be interested in. Noem's combination of status within Trump's administration and obvious political ambition make her the most interesting potential challenge from the populist wing beside Trump's own son in the event that Vance or another chosen successor is incapable of capturing the imagination of ordinary Republican voters. Also within the broad MAGA umbrella, there's the political commentator Tucker Carlson, age 56 and working semi-independently since he was fired from Fox News back in 2023. Carlson played a pivotal role in shaping Trump's political movement from the very beginning, and as a thought leader in far-right politics, he's been a major proponent for all manner of hardline positions and conspiracy theories. Even on the right, he's a controversial figure, but he's got millions of supporters within the Republican Party and retains his position as a powerful political activist and driver of discourse. He's never held political office, but he might be the single best positioned candidate to come in as a true outsider, never a member of the government in Washington, and not even an official member of Trump's own inner circle. He's also staked out a position within the staunchly anti-war wing of the Republican Party, a group that may not trust either Vance or Rubio to further its goals once they come into power. Last but not least among this tier of important contenders, we've got to consider Josh Hawley, a 45-year-old senator from the state of Missouri. While Hawley isn't a key member of the MAGA movement and is at times a dissenting voice within the party, he's ideologically aligned with the movement well enough that he's seen as a broadly legitimate figure by most Republicans. He also stakes out a different set of positions than most of his potential rivals as an economic populist who, at times, speaks about America's class of ultra-wealthy in a way that's more similar to Bernie Sanders than Donald Trump. Hawley trends rightward even within the Republican Party, and he was the first senator who vowed to object to the certification of the 2020 election, but he's proven willing to work with Democrats in the Senate on economic matters, corporate regulation, trust busting, and more. According to Republican insiders speaking anonymously to the American press, Hawley is understood to be laying the groundwork for a 2028 campaign in hopes that he can advocate a broadly populist vision for the US that's practically untethered to the MAGA movement and could catch fire as the next big thing in populist politics. For posterity's sake, we should mention a couple of other names that could conceivably be included in this category that we here at Political Fronts would rule out at this time. Texas Governor Greg Abbott has indicated his intent to run for a fourth term in his current position in 2026, seemingly taking him out of the 2028 contest. Former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie is a perennial anti-Trump candidate and consistently draws the support of a portion of anti-Trump Republicans, but he's attempted to capture the nomination on 2 past occasions and has had a pretty bruising experience both times. As such, we're going to take a bit of a leap and posit that neither Abbott nor Christie will be meaningful contenders for the Republican nomination in 2028, although, of course, it's American politics, anything is possible. So from here, we can move to the list that we'd call B-tier Republican contenders and turn to the wide array of other political figures who have an outside chance of relevance in 2028. Of those, perhaps the most notorious is Georgia Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, age 51 at the time of writing, a far-right figure who's called 9/11 a hoax, endorsed QAnon and white genocide conspiracy theories, and openly self-identified as a Christian nationalist. She's also got a whole controversy that we could describe with the 3 words Jewish space lasers, but that's a story for another day.
Why don't you go talk about Jewish space lasers, and really, why don't you off? How about that?
According to Republican insiders, Greene isn't seen as a true contender for the presidency in a general election setting, and as such, there's some effort to kindly dissuade her from pursuing a presidential run. But there's a reason that current Republican leaders are concerned about that possibility. As an openly conspiracy-heavy candidate with perhaps the most disruptive record in all of Congress, Greene does stand to capture a share of votes from the part of the Republican Party that most closely aligns with her views. And in a crowded field of candidates, that sort of politician can quickly become an important factor. If Greene really did catch on as a Republican candidate, there's a non-zero chance that she could surge to capture the nomination, despite having practically no chance of actually becoming president once she faces any reasonably normal-seeming Democrat. Then there's the former Democratic representative and current Trump administration Director of National Intelligence, Tulsi Gabbard. 44 years old and hailing from the state of Hawaii, Gabbard was a convert to the MAGA movement, and she was seen as a promising presidential